Our keynote speaker today needs no introduction. We are very excited to have with us today Charles Hoskinson. He has been involved in the world of blockchain and cryptocurrency since the early days of Bitcoin. He is the founder of 3 blockchain-focused startups, Invictus Innovation, Ethereum, IOHK. He's also the founding chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation Education Committee, as well as establishing the Bitcoin Research Group. Charles, great to have you here.
So lovely to be here, Mr. Lee. Thank you so much for having me on.
Great. You've had so much influence in the world of blockchain. I've always wondered, what would the blockchain landscape look like? Or would it be totally different if you were never born? What has been your main influence on this industry?
Well, that's a good question. You know, the point of decentralization is a magic ability that you can remove any entity or any person, and the thing is still there, and it's still vibrant, and it's still resilient. Like Bitcoin, for example, if we were to remove Coinbase or Blockstream or any of these other great companies, Bitcoin would still be around. So it's truly a decentralized protocol. That said, you know, there's some projects that would probably be materially different. I don't think that Dan Larimer would be as involved in cryptocurrencies or have had as much success if I wasn't around, because he and I partnered with Invictus Innovations, and I was the guy who brought in the funding to get BitShares where it needed to go and give him his shot. He perhaps would have started a little bit later and missed that first wave. Ethereum certainly wouldn't have been in Switzerland. That was the big thing that I brought. Vitalik was choosing between Singapore and Switzerland, and I said, let's do Switzerland. So it would have had a very different founding culture. And obviously Cardano wouldn't exist. And a lot of the science that we've done over the last 5 years, the 90 papers that we've written in my research group and the foundational work we've done, none of that would exist. And the many derivative works would not exist, or they would be in a much more scattered, less focused form. I guess my primary contribution has always been rallying people. Bring great people together and say, it's going to be really stressful, it's going to be really hard, but it's going to be the best work of your career. And you're going to enjoy it, you're going to love it, and after it's done, you're going to miss it. And I've done that for the last 8 years, and it's been a heck of a lot of fun all the way through.
Well, great. There are so many things that's happening in the blockchain space, but a topic that everybody's talking about, Ethereum is really slow. Okay. You mentioned in the past, and I'll quote, Ethereum can't scale. None of its dApps can. The industry needs a system that gains resources as it gains users and performs at the same level, regardless of the people using it. Can you elaborate on this? And how does this issue get addressed by Cardano?
Yeah, it's a really complex issue, and you can't completely solve it with just one protocol. So you kind of know when protocols scale. BitTorrent is a great example of that. So it's solving a slightly different problem. It's the problem of data transmission. But when you're downloading a movie with BitTorrent with lots of people, you actually get it faster. This is the exact opposite of a lot of protocols where when you gain users, you have less resources for everybody. So Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, all these other systems, they're all examples of systems that are replicated. So they only have a finite pool of resources for your user set. So as you get more and more users, you get less and less resources for everybody. So what you want to do is you want to create protocols that over time, as you gain users, you gain more capabilities. The problem is that when you do that, you have to go from a system where everybody's equal to a system where there's some, what do we call heterogeneity. So it means that certain actors have special capabilities over other actors. And you also have to solve things like availability. For example, certain resources may be offline when you need them, so you can't download your movie, or you can't get your transaction to post, or they can't find your account until that resource comes back online. So it's a very, very, very hard problem. And it's something that Bitcoin didn't try to solve, and the first generation of Ethereum didn't try to solve. Now Vitalik with S2 is trying to solve that. And we actually have a pretty good strategy as well for Cardano, where we say, okay, just build a pool of resources that's large enough for a big set of users, millions of users. And that's probably good for your first generation. And then invest very heavily into side chains and state channels and these types of technologies. And that stuff is going to get you to millions to billions of transactions per day. Okay, and once you're there, then you're probably not going to need to exceed Visa scale or MasterCard scale. for a while. And then you can start micro-focusing on certain things like network utilization and data utilization and these types of things. But the only way you're ever going to solve it is you have to solve it systematically, and you have to solve it involving the academic community and the systems community. Because there's people whose day job, they work at Google and at Microsoft and at Amazon and Facebook, and they deal with these massive scale systems with billions of users. And they have these great protocols. And really, it's a game of how do we translate those protocols to work from centralized data centers to fully distributed systems. The Ouroboros research agenda for Cardano started that process, where we found out how to have a consensus algorithm that as the price goes up, it gets more decentralized over time. Then, because it's more decentralized, there's more consensus nodes in the system. You can embed within them state channels and other services. Then each and every one of those can actually accelerate the system. And that's kind of stage one. Now, F2 decided to do everything all at once, where they're also sharding the state space and the ledger and these other things and trying to figure all that out. And that's much, much more ambitious. And it's not clear if you actually end up getting a better product. You actually lose security. You go from about half Byzantine resistant to a third to a quarter, depending on how you do it. And you have to be super careful with the generation of random numbers, with your clock. And if you're even off a little bit, the network will collapse or not synchronize properly, as we've seen with a lot of their failed test nets. This is why we chose a much more reasonable approach that was validated by years of systems theory that can scale up to what we think is necessary for the next 5 or 10 years of mass growth, like millions of people coming in. And it gives the industry a bit more time to mature on sharding, zero-knowledge proofs, state channels, and these other techniques, which will inevitably allow us to get to millions to billions, which is where we're going to go as an industry as a whole. And we'll be ready for it just in time. And we won't have to make any sacrifices or experience, years and years of delays because stuff blows up in our face.
Well, you mentioned something about F2, and, you've been very vocal, obviously, about its shortcomings. Now, I want you to say something positive. What did they do well?
Well, I admire the ambition. I cannot fault a project for trying to shoot for the moon, because even if you don't get there, you leave a legacy. There's a lot of cool things that Ethereum got started. Like they started the smart contract revolution. They really started pushing zero-knowledge proofs and for computation, like with their strategic investments in Starkware. They funded millions of dollars of grants to Plasma. And so state channels really started evolving. That state of the art started being pushed out. And they're also provoking the conversation of how do you shard a blockchain? What does that look like? What does that architecture look like? Even if they fail, it's still incredibly valuable to the research community, to the engineering community in the space as a whole, to kind of learn from what they're doing. You see, you always have to figure out how ambitious do you want to be as an entrepreneur. It's like this vaccine race, for example. We have all these companies that want to make coronavirus vaccines, and some of them are betting on super state-of-the-art, super advanced techniques. And other ones are going with like tried and true viral vector techniques that we've been doing since the smallpox vaccine. So the question is, how much innovation can you afford given your time budget and the nature of the industry? It's the same situation with cryptocurrencies. You have to kind of decide, where are we going to be in 3 to 5 years? And is your technological vision going to help you get there, or is it going to hinder you from getting there? I'm skeptical that what they've done is going to get them where they need to go, but I'm optimistic that what they're doing is actually beneficial for everybody in the industry, because we can all learn from that. We've already seen huge amounts of great research in VDFs, for example, because of Ethereum. We've seen a lot of great discussions about consensus protocols in the proof of stake space because of Ethereum. They've provided a lot of academic funding, in particular at Stanford and other places. And that's just beneficial for everybody, because all that work ends up in the open source community.
You know what I found with every expert I've ever talked to, there's an evolution in thinking, because when you spend thousands and thousands of hours on the same topic, you evolve in thinking. And that's what's great about, any expert in any industry. Recently, you were quoted that the governance component is the single hardest component of all cryptocurrencies. I'm sure this relates a little bit to what you're doing with Voltaire. Can you tell us what you mean by this, and why is it so important now?
Well, if you ever truly want to be decentralized, you have to find a way to pay for the evolution of your system. And if you rely upon patrons, what happens is a small group of well-capitalized actors end up basically co-opting the roadmap of the ecosystem. We see this actually with web standards. For example, there's a recent fight with Google having some influence over the W3C and other standards bodies to inject ads into the browser as a web standard. And people like Brave are saying, whoa, this is a bad deal. What are you guys doing? So there's this concept of the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. So you really don't want a small group of external actors coming in and co-opting your system. But then the problem is that if you want to have the alternative or use the blockchain to pay for its own stuff, you have a lot of complexity there. Like who decides that? How do you petition that? How do you vote on that? What is a fair vote? What level of participation do you need? How are people going to be informed? You know, these types of things. And that's just on the money side. Then you have the change management side, which is, okay, should we have big blocks or little blocks? Now, Roger Ver, he has something to say about that. And that's why we have Bitcoin Cash. And similar, should we do the DAO hack? Should we reverse it or should we keep it? I had something to say about that. Now we have Ethereum Classic. Okay, so governance is super hard because what do you do when you have irreconcilable differences? Well, if the solution is every time we have them, the system split, you won't get any Fortune 500 adoption or government adoption because they won't want to join a system where every 3 years the system splits. And if they don't pick the right side, they have 1 million people attacking them over Twitter, right? It's a very problematic thing. So you have to build governance systems that allow you to change even under controversial situations and people to accept the change. And by the way, we've never solved this completely in person. Look at the United States right now. We just had a presidential election. One candidate thinks he's won. The other candidate said he's won. And there's a big fight going on right now. And
he's forked, right?
Yeah. And so we've kind of forked the United States in that respect. So we have 74 million who are on one side, 71 million on the other side. No matter who wins that fight, the other half is going to be very, very angry. And it's effectively a cultural fork in the community. And that's a governance failure at the end of the day. It's a failure in the voting system to give you a clear winner and a lack of belief in the fidelity of that system. So it's a super, super hard problem. It's why Vitalik and others have actually eschewed it and said, hey, we're not even going to think about it. But I think it's absolutely essential for a third generation cryptocurrency because you can never decentralize and fire your founders without it. Because you'll just trade one small group of powerful actors and curators for another group of powerful actors and curators, but you never decentralize and get to a system where you're actually controlled by millions of independent people, as opposed to a dozen guys in a room who you can feed with 2 pizzas. And this is why we wanted to tackle that head on with Cardano. And we've had just great progress. We have over 3,500 people in Idea Scale, which is an innovation management partner we're working with. Every day they're voting on things. And we're just turning on a lot of the voting capabilities. And we're measuring KPIs like you wouldn't believe, like level of participation, how many hours they spend in the platform, the types of conversations they're having, how ideas flow, how do you eschew rational ignorance. It's been just an amazing experience. And we keep bringing domain experts on. So after we achieve a certain level, we can bring governance and poli-sci experts and sociology experts and organizational psychology experts and management experts. And over time, you can build up a corpus of best practices. And then eventually the community will actually get off those training wheels and be able to run the whole system themselves and pay for the needs of the system and also decide how to change the system as we encumber greater challenges like quantum computers and other such things in the future.
Well, that's great. You know, there are so many trends that I see that's happening in 2020 that are very interesting. One that's getting a tremendous amount of hype, as everybody is talking about, is DeFi. Now, how do you compare this to maybe what you've already seen with the evolution of crypto? Where do you see DeFi going?
Well, I mean, it's a natural evolution, and it's just we throw words on top of things because it makes them sexier and more investable. But everybody's been trying to do stable coins and decentralized exchanges and oracles and these other things since the beginning of the industry. In fact, that was my very first project with Dan Larimer. BitShares was all about how do you create a stable coin and also trade that with other assets in kind of a decentralized way. And we also even talked about oracles in that respect. And that was back in 2013. So DeFi is nothing new. It's just we've formalized it in a way that it's much more investable and it's much more understandable for the layman. But basically the idea is that we'd like to take banking and insurance and we'd like to take monetary policy and these things and create applications that don't require central curation or corporations to run them. The problem with DeFi as it stands right now is that the people who build the systems don't pay for the mistakes when the systems don't work. That's a moral hazard because they usually get paid up front or get a big boost of money from the appreciation of the asset, and then they liquidate. So they're not vested in the system anymore. And then when the system blows up, it's the other investors who have to clean up the mess. And these guys walk away and say, oh, it's open source code and so forth. So what happens when you have these moral hazards and market failures? The same thing with the ICO revolution. It tends to invite regulators to come in. Now with DeFi, you'll have regulators of a different kind. You'll have people worry a lot more about compliance. So they think about your customer and anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing, then they think about securities regulations, or they think about special securities regulations like the regulations of derivatives or options, the regulations of commodities like CFTC stuff. And then of course you have bank secrecy and all these other things that will apply, looking from an American viewpoint, but foreign regulators look at things usually in a similar way. So DeFi brings a lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunities. And actually, I think the primary consumer of DeFi is not online yet. So we're in Africa, we're in Ethiopia and all throughout the continent. And there's 1 billion plus people there. And about 800 million of them are either unbanked or are sub-banked. They don't have the financial identity, the economic identity that they need. DeFi is really the solution for them, because then they don't have to worry about their local banking system, their local insurance system. They don't have to worry too much about their local currencies or capital controls. They can securitize their businesses. They can get rule of law because it's code enforced basically to run their things. And we're conducting lots of experiments there to basically prove that out. And by the way, the incumbent regulations just simply don't apply or are too weak to be able to have anything to say about that. That's why things like M-Pesa, for example, caught Africa by storm. So I think DeFi is right now a solution in search of a consumer, and continents like Africa are consumers in search of a solution. And we haven't had that peanut butter jelly moment where they've come together and everything just kind of gets magical. But I think within the next 3 years to 5 years, that's going to happen. And you're going to see tens of millions of customers into these applications. And they're really going to have a lot of impact and promise.
Well, I think you brought a really important point, which is real use cases for blockchain, right? That's very important. What we saw a lot, payment services surge in 2020. Right. As the number of transactions on blockchain increased significantly. People are trapped at home and many businesses are going digital. I mean, COVID's had a large impact, or how has COVID had an impact on the blockchain industry, in your opinion?
Well, I'd say there are 3 big things. One, trust in institutions is at an all-time low. Like just the other day, Pfizer announced that they have a miracle vaccine. My dad's a doctor, my brother's a doctor, my uncle's an infectious disease doctor, my grandfather was a doctor, he was an OB/GYN. We have lots of doctors in the family. I was the oddball who became a mathematician. And if you talk to any of them, or any physician for that matter, and say, have a vaccine with low side effects and 90% efficacy, is that good? They'll say, that's one of the best ever made. You knocked out of the park. You went golfing, you got 3 holes in 1. You just don't see that very often in medicine. So most people would be super excited about that. I posted it on my Twitter feed. The vast majority of comments there were, it's a Bill Gates New World Order conspiracy, or the vaccine's going to change your DNA, or it's convenient, it's not real, vaccines cause cancer or autism. So that's one thing. That the election system is another example of that, where people don't believe somebody's won. People believe all kinds of things about COVID, some probably true, some not true. The point is, truth is in short supply. Belief is in short supply. And so blockchain as a technology class is the anti-institution, in that it comes in when the institution doesn't have trust and credibility. Nobody in the world puts a blockchain system in if they just trust their government, they trust everybody, and there's no waste, fraud, or abuse, and you don't need auditability. You put it in because it forces you to behave honestly, transparently, and also show people that you've done that. You can prove these things. So that can be supply chains, that can be research funding, that can be political donations, that can be voting, that can be money systems, and everybody's treated the same. Bill Gates gets treated the same way as the poor guy on the street. Nobody gets special access to that protocol or system. The founder of Ethereum, founder of Cardano, I have exactly equal access in these systems to any other user. I don't get any special keys or oversight in that respect. Okay, so first, trust is in short supply. So there's a big appetite for how do we restore that without a civil war or a purge or a dictatorship or whatever. And people are saying, well, maybe blockchain is a great antidote for that. Second, to your point, a lot of people have had much more time to really sit down and philosophically think about life. You know, we have all these distractions in life. You know, we go fishing and we go to concerts and movie theaters and drinking and restaurants. And now we're at home and we're all like Zen masters because we got nothing to do. You look at the download rate of the Calm meditation app through the roof. Look at the amount of podcasts that are being watched, Joe Rogan or anything. They've gone up fivefold. For a while, it was impossible to get microphones like Yeti microphones and other things on Amazon because so many people were buying microphone equipment and webcams and other things to communicate with each other online. So this brought a huge surge of people into a state where they had the time to start breaking out of their bubble and thinking about the world a little differently. And one of the primary concerns people had this year was financial. People were very worried about their stocks. People were very worried about their financial future. Millions of people lost their jobs. And they said, oh God, how am I going to survive? Where should I put my money? And so people were starting to look for alternative investments. So we saw a big spike in gold consumption, in silver consumption, but we also saw a huge amount of interest in cryptocurrencies because it just made sense to people. They said, oh my God, if this gets really bad, government just printed $6 trillion in the United States. What happens if they take money out of my bank account like Cyprus? I should probably put my money in a place that they can't freeze it and they can't take it, and it's probably going to go up. So that's why you saw a huge surge after lockdowns happened of Google searches for Bitcoin and for cryptocurrencies and a huge influx of people in. And I say a third thing to kind of close this off about, because it's such a big topic, how did COVID change everything? It changed people's relationships with each other. You know, I traveled 200 to 250 days a year to run my company. I'd come to Korea, I'd come to Hong Kong, I'd go to Singapore and Japan and Mongolia. Then I go straight down to Australia. Then I go fly out to Europe, and I'd be in London and France and Germany and Italy and so forth. And so I kept traveling and traveling and traveling. And now all of a sudden I'm in a situation where I'm stuck. So all the tools and techniques I used to have to motivate people, to directly engage with people and relate to people have changed a lot. It's one of the reasons why Zoom is right now more valuable than ExxonMobil. It's like certain winners come out of this paradigm. And so cryptocurrencies are another example of that, where it's given my organization and me personally a reflection on how to work with people remotely, not just in communication, but in commerce and in payments and these other things. And again, blockchain is a native digital technology. And like all of these things that live in the internet, they're going to benefit from that new workflow that I have and my company has and other people have. And it allows you to just have deep work and focus where you can really get serious on things and drill down. So we've seen more innovation this year in the blockchain space than I think any other year. We've seen more code written this year in the blockchain space than any other year. And we've seen a lot more serious consideration of these things than any other year. So we're really starting to have a convergence. And I think 2021 is going to be one of our best years as a consequence.
Well, that's great. So put on your crystal ball hat and then give us some main groundbreaking things you'll see upside or downside in the coming years ahead.
For blockchain or for the world in general?
For blockchain.
Okay. For blockchain, I think that there are three miracles that are going to, over the time, work their way into our industry, and they're going to change a lot of things. One, we're going to see proof of stake and this class of consensus algorithms get deeply embedded in a massive transfer from proof of work native systems to hybrid or to pure proof of stake systems, just because there's such efficiency gains and scalability gains and cost reduction for running these types of things. So suddenly that opens up a whole new class of problems, from payments to IoT to other things that you can now do on blockchain. So that's going to continue. And the academic research is clear. I mean, you got Algorand and Tezos and Cardano and Cosmos and Polkadot and F2, and all of these projects are actually backed by academic papers and tens of thousands of citations, and scientists are thinking about these things on a regular basis. And then on the proof of work side, you just have a bunch of people say, can't work, it's perpetual motion, cause reasons. And they never actually can form an actual scientific argument for it. So as you see Ethereum work and Cardano work and these other systems work at scale, people just say, what are we doing? Why are we on these terrible systems? And so unless you have useful proof of work, there's just no future there. Okay, so that's one big change. We'll see a sea change of both people and value and applications in the next 3 years. Okay, second, I think zero knowledge cryptography is growing exponentially. You know, everywhere you look. You got Marlin and Plonk and Spartan and Sonic. We created that one. And then you got Fractal and Dark. Well, I guess they call it Supersonic now. You got all of this stuff, right? And Starks as well from 11 Assassin. So that's just beginning. And every 6 months, I see a new paper coming, and soon it'll be every 3 months. And every time the systems get better, they have much more sophisticated and elegant math in them, like class groups. And that means you don't need to have trusted setup. They get much more efficient and optimized. In many cases, you can parallelize the provers and so forth. What does this mean for our industry? Two things. One, it's going to really enhance the privacy side, but it doesn't necessarily mean you give up regulation, because you can embed within the transaction audit and oversight. But two, and more importantly, it's going to massively improve scalability, because with these structures, you can have full node security with a light client. So you can throw away the whole blockchain. And there's some projects even trying to do this, like the Coda protocol, for example. You just throw the whole blockchain away and say, I don't care. It just have a proof. And anytime you see a transaction come, you can check it against your proof, and you know that the coins are real and they haven't been double spent. Great. So what does that mean? It means that we can have our blockchain system scale to petabytes, to exabytes. They could be as big as the Googleplex. And you as a user will get the same security as if you have the whole storage, even though you only have like a kilobyte or a megabyte or however large your proof stack happens to be. So these are just two things that will come from that zero knowledge revolution as it's pushing its way through, in addition to smart contract scalability and a litany of other things. And I say the third big thing is going to be governance in the blockchain space, because ICOs are dying. They're being regulated out of existence, but because treasury systems are not illegal, they're not a security, they're actually an emergence of the monetary policy of the systems. You're going to wake up and suddenly have dozens of blockchains that are printing tens to hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars every year for their growth and development. What does that mean? It means that established companies, the brand names you've heard, will come into our industry because they want some of that money. And they'll just start submitting ballots and actually doing work. And suddenly we'll see a common vocation for developers and consultancies to be working for a blockchain. So instead of working for some foundation or working for a software company like Microsoft, you might end up working for the Cardano blockchain full time, and that's your day job, and you actually have a physical counterparty there, and that might be sustainable. And if that's the case, then we now have a funding mechanism for the evolution of open source infrastructure. We've never had that before.
Well, great. There you have it from one of the premier thought leaders in the blockchain space, and I will say, you were way too humble earlier when I asked you what blockchain would have looked like if you weren't ever born. I think it would look vastly different. You've had a major contribution. Thank you so much for giving us your insight today. And enjoy the great weather in Colorado.
Thank you so much, Juwan, and thank you so much for the invitation to the conference. I had a lot of fun.